For this video, we are going to discuss the crime of resistance and disobedience to a person in authority or the agents of such person as defined and penalized under Article 151 of the Revised Penal Code. Article 151. Resistance and disobedience to a person in authority or the agents of such person. The penalty of arresto mayor and a fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos shall be imposed upon any person who, not being included in the provisions of the preceding articles, shall resist or seriously disobey any person in authority or the agents of such person while engaged in the performance of official duties. When the disobedience to an agent of a person in authority is not of a serious nature, the penalty of arresto menor or a fine ranging from 2,000 to 20,000 pesos shall be imposed upon the offender. There are two crimes punished under Article 151. The first crime or the first punishable act is resistance and serious disobedience under the first paragraph of the said article. And the second crime or the second punishable act is resistance and simple disobedience under the second paragraph of the same article. Now, let us discuss the first punishable act, which is the crime of resistance and serious disobedience. I want you at this point in time or at this juncture to take note of the underscored portion, because what separates or what differentiates the first punishable act from the second punishable act is that in the first punishable act, the disobedience is serious in character, whereas in the second punishable act, the disobedience is not of a serious character but only simple disobedience. So here are the elements of the crime of resistance and serious disobedience. First element, a person in authority or his agent is engaged in the performance of official duty, or the person in authority or his agent gives a lawful order to the offender. And second element, the offender resists or seriously disobeys such person in authority or his agent. And third, the act of that offender is not included in the provisions of Article 148, Article 149, and Article 150 of the Revised Penal Code. Now, let us first discuss the elements of the first punishable act in Article 151, which is the crime of resistance and serious disobedience. First element, that a person in authority or his agent is engaged in the performance of official duty or gives a lawful order to the offender. Here, take note that the offended party can either be a person in authority or an agent of a person in authority. A private individual can never be the offended party in the crime of resistance and disobedience. And not all public officers, for that matter, can be offended parties in the crime of resistance and disobedience, because only those public officers who are persons in authority or agents of a person in authority can be offended parties for purposes of Article 151 of the Revised Penal Code. Also, the person in authority or the agent of a person in authority must be engaged in the performance of official duty at the time of the commission of the criminal act, or that prior or immediately prior to the commission of the criminal act, the person in authority or his agent gave a lawful order to the offender. For example, X, a policeman serving a warrant of arrest against Y. A policeman, you already know, is an agent of a person in authority. Serving a warrant of arrest is one of the functions of a police officer. So, the act of X, the policeman, in serving a warrant of arrest against Y, who is the would-be offender, X here is deemed to be in the performance of his official duty. Another example, X, a policeman, ordering Y to go home pursuant to the 10 p.m. curfew ordinance. Again, a policeman is an agent of a person in authority. Now, what is the order here? The order here is the act of X in ordering Y to go home. And is the act of X in ordering Y to go home legal or lawful? Yes, because it is based on an ordinance, a 10 p.m. curfew ordinance. Please note that the phrase lawful order contemplated in Article 151 must be a direct verbal order from the person in authority or his agent. Meaning to say, the person in authority must give a verbal order to another person within his view or within his hearing distance. It does not include legal provisions of a general character, or it does not include written orders issued by the courts or by the government agencies or even by the local government units. What do I mean by this? Let me give you an example. Suppose Mayor X issues an executive order mandating the use of face masks in public places to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Can an executive order, a written executive order by itself, be enough basis for the police officer to charge a particular individual for the crime of resistance and disobedience by the mere fact that at the time the police officer saw that particular individual, he was not wearing a face mask? The answer is no, because like what I said, aside from that written order, there must be a verbal order coming from either the person in authority himself or his agent, addressed to a particular individual within his hearing distance. The mere failure to comply with such executive order does not amount to a violation of Article 151. Second example, X was walking along the highway not wearing a face mask. Can the policeman right away charge him for resistance and disobedience, whether it be simple or serious? The answer is no. Like what I said, there must first be a direct verbal order from the said policeman requiring X to wear a face mask. And if the latter refuses to obey, then this will be the point in time wherein we can say that the crime of resistance and disobedience has been committed. Also, the order must be lawful. Otherwise, the resistance is justified. So, since X the policeman, or since the policeman in my previous example was armed with a curfew ordinance, meaning to say he had legal basis to order a private individual to go home because it is already 10 o'clock in the evening. The order was lawful. Now, if there was no 10 p.m. curfew ordinance and the policeman ordered the particular individual to go home, and that particular individual did not heed the order of the policeman or disobeyed him, there will be no crime of resistance and disobedience because the order itself is not legal or not lawful. Such that if the order is not lawful or legal and that particular individual resists or disobeys such agent of a person in authority, the resistance is justified. Example, X was stopped at a checkpoint by several policemen. The latter then ordered X to get out of the vehicle for a vehicle and body search. X refused, insisting that the policeman could only conduct a search in plain view. When one of the policemen forced X to get out of the car, X resisted by shoving and punching the policeman who tried to pull him out of the vehicle. Is X here liable for the crime of resistance and disobedience? No, because the resistance here is justified. Why is it justified? Because there is no legal basis for a vehicle or body search. It does not come under the instances of warrantless searches. Only a plain view search is allowed in checkpoints, not unless the police officers are armed with probable cause, sufficient in themselves to indicate that the person about to be searched is carrying or transporting or possessing a contraband. But in this particular example, there was no basis for the policeman to order X to get out of the vehicle so that they could conduct not only a body search on X but also a vehicle search on X's vehicle, such that the resistance here by X is justified. Hence, X is not criminally liable under Article 151. Second element, we are still in the first punishable act, that the offender resists or seriously disobeys such person in authority or his agent. Here, the person in authority or his agent must be in the performance of official duty which the offender resisted, or that the person in authority or his agent gives a direct verbal order which the offender seriously disobeyed. For example, while the policeman was about to arrest X pursuant to a warrant of arrest, X pushed the policeman or shoved the policeman and thereafter ran away or escaped. This is an example of an act of the offender resisting and seriously disobeying a person in authority or his agent. And in this example, a policeman is an agent of a person in authority. Also take note that the resistance or disobedience here for purposes of the crime of resistance and serious disobedience must be active. There must be active resistance or active disobedience. Why active? Or what do we mean by active resistance or active disobedience? There must be some aggressive act directed against or towards the person in authority or his agent showing such disobedience or resistance, like shoving, punching, pushing a person in authority or his agent. Third element, that the act of the offender is not included in the provisions of Articles 148, referring to the crime of direct assault, 149, referring to the crime of indirect assault, and Article 150, which refers to the crime of disobedience to summons, etc. Here, the act must not constitute direct assault, because if the act constitutes direct assault, then the crime is direct assault or indirect assault or disobedience, as the case may be. Example, if aside from merely shoving the policeman trying to implement the warrant of arrest, the offender attacks and mauls the policeman, indicating a manifest intention to defy and show utter disrespect for the law, then the crime is direct assault. Now, let us go to the elements of the second punishable act, which is the crime of resistance and simple disobedience. So, the first punishable act is called resistance and serious disobedience. This time, the second punishable act is properly called resistance and simple disobedience. Elements. Number one, an agent of a person in authority is engaged in the performance of official duty or gives a lawful order to the offender. Second element, the offender resists or disobeys such agent of a person in authority. And third element, such disobedience is not of a serious nature. So these are the only three elements of the second punishable act, resistance and simple disobedience. Let's go back to the first element, that an agent of a person in authority is engaged in the performance of official duty or gives a lawful order to the offender. If you notice, for purposes of the crime of resistance and simple disobedience, the offended party here is only the agent of a person in authority. Meaning to say, a person in authority can never be the offended party if the crime is only simple disobedience. Because in simple disobedience, the offended party is only an agent of a person in authority. Also, the agent of a person in authority must be engaged in the performance of official duty or gives a lawful order. Second element, that the offender resists or disobeys such agent of a person in authority. And third element, such disobedience is not of a serious nature. Here, the resistance or disobedience must only be a passive form of resistance or disobedience. So, you can now notice the difference. In the crime of resistance and serious disobedience, the resistance or disobedience must be active. Whereas here, in the crime of resistance and simple disobedience only, the resistance or disobedience is only passive in nature. In other words, there must be no aggressive or violent act towards an agent of a person in authority. Otherwise, the crime will be that of resistance and serious disobedience. Example, the traffic policeman ordered X to park his car at the designated parking space as his car, referring to the car of X, was or is obstructing the flow of traffic. X, however, refused. Here, X's mere refusal to follow the lawful order of the traffic policeman in this example constitutes resistance and simple disobedience under the second paragraph. What do you notice of the example? there was no active resistance or disobedience. The resistance or disobedience showed by X could only be regarded as passive in nature or a passive form of resistance because he did not employ an aggressive act towards the traffic policeman.